Welcome back, everyone, as we continue this look at one of the forgotten stories of history, the South Sea Bubble. If you did not see episode 1 of my reaction to this series, the link is in the description to take you back to that, as is the link to the original content. We always want to give credit where credit is due for their great work that they've done on this series to give us a place to start and having a conversation about this. If you enjoy this channel, if you've been maybe hanging around, maybe you've seen a few videos and you like what you see and you haven't already, would invite you to consider subscribing or just double check that you are subscribed. YouTube does some weird things sometimes, so please check and make sure you're subscribed, and you can turn on that notification bell that time. Every time a new video goes up, you won't miss it. Thanks, and let's go ahead and dive into part 2.
When we last left off, Harley, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and Blunt, one of the principal operatives of the Hollow Sword Blade Company, were looking for something bigger and better than a simple lottery to keep the government afloat. The scheme they came up with was the South Sea Company. It's South Sea Company, by the way, not South Seas Company. I think I was saying South Seas Company for the entire last episode. Sorry about that. Anyway, Harley...
And, that brings up a good point. Listen, when you're making this stuff, no matter how much research you do, no matter how much work you do, mistakes happen. I make mistakes on this channel all the time. Thankfully, what's awesome is having a collection of people, thousands of people getting eyes and ears on the same material. People will catch things that other people miss. And occasionally, because I don't watch these in advance, unless I tell you I don't watch them in advance, I'm doing all this kind of off the cuff. There's no planning involved on my part because I want to try and react organically. Occasionally, I'll say things off the top of my head and I'll miss something or I'll get a detail wrong. And when I do, and you guys call me out on that, always check the comment section, because I'll pin a comment if there's something specific that I need to correct. Either a comment somebody left to correct me or my own comment correcting something I said. So if there's ever something like that, I do my best. This is all about learning. We want the right information.
Stymied at every turn and frustrated with the Whig-controlled Bank of England's refusal to help, finally thought, what if we just built a Tory-controlled company to do the Bank of England's job? At which point Blunt probably started seeing dollar signs and hyperventilating. Together, they came up with a plan for a trading company that would assume all of the government's debt. Here's how it would work. Anybody who held British government debt would get to exchange that debt for shares in the new company. The government would pay the newly formed company roughly 6% interest on that debt, or about £500,000, a far lower interest rate than the government had been paying when all the debt was in the hands of private individuals. The company would then turn around and use that money as a dividend for its investors. But in order to make this offer enticing, there had to be something more, and that's where the South Seas part comes in. You see, fundamentally, to convince anybody holding government debt to give up the principal of their debt, the amount of money they first lent to the government, for stock in an unknown company, and a dividend payment that was probably lower than the interest they were supposed to be getting anyway, you'd have to convince them that the stock they were getting was going to be worth far more than the debt they already held.
Yeah, and see, that's where already you can see the problem with this, because if the people who owned that debt are expecting a certain return, and the company that their investment is going to is offering less return, where are they going to make up the difference? So this is where you kind of get into the corruption and the hiding of the truth, and it's a recipe for disaster, but they're either not thinking about that or they don't care.
So on top of that £500,000 the government was going to give the company annually, it also gave them a monopoly on trading in the South Seas.
There you go.
And man, did they turn on the hype machine for this.
This is a time period when trading is what is motivating a lot of business. You have the East India Company, which is another one of these joint stock companies, as they're known, where you have the investment into the company, how it's funded, how the exploration gets funded, how these expeditions to the New World get funded is with the promise of return on their investment, because they're going to find gold or they're going to get new resources of wealth, and you're going to get a return on your investment. If you're not getting a return, it's not worth it.
Everybody from the government to the directors of the Hollow Sword Blade Company to Daniel Defoe, the guy who wrote Robinson Crusoe, started talking about the unimaginable riches that would flow from the South Seas into Britain once this company was established. And everybody in Britain knew how well the Honorable East Indian Company had done for its shareholders. Here was a chance to get in on the ground floor of something similar. There was only one small problem with this scheme. The South Seas mentioned in the deal referred to Central and South America, and by Central and South America, they meant all the major ports in Central and South America. And by all the major ports, they meant a bunch of ports that happened to be exclusively owned by Spain. And, well, Britain was currently at war with Spain. Like I said last time, Britain was at war with, like, everybody. This didn't faze Harley or Blunt, though. To them, the answer was simple. They would simply end a decades-long multinational war. This time, they got the guy who wrote Gulliver's Travels to do their propaganda work. They laid it on so thick, they even got the famous Whig Sir Robert Walpole and John Churchill, the Duke.
Did that say Warpool?
Laid it on so thick, they even got the famous Whig Sir Robert Walpole.
It does say Warpool. It's Walpole. Save your comments, okay? Listen, if you're new to the channel, before I met my wife, I was engaged to a girl that I had wanted to marry since middle school. Her last name was Walpole, and she was a direct descendant, as I found out later in doing her family tree. She was a direct descendant of Sir Robert Walpole, so kind of a sore subject around here, because I didn't end up marrying her.
And John Churchill, the Duke of Marlborough, a hero of the War of Spanish Succession, locked in the Tower of London as part of their efforts to smear the opposition. But for all this, they still didn't have the votes they needed to get past the House of Lords. Funny thing about the House of Lords, though, all you had to do to be a part of it was...
Wait, yay anachronisms. I want to catch this one.
Funny thing about the House of Lords...
Oh, so I guess in this case, we're talking about what you see there and what everybody refers to as Big Ben. That's not Big Ben. Big Ben's inside of there, and you can hear Big Ben. You don't see Big Ben. That's Elizabeth Tower, which contains Big Ben. So I think that's probably what they're referring to there.
Though, all you had to do to be a part of it was be a lord. You didn't need to be elected to the House of Lords. Until recently, if you were a peer of the realm, you just got a seat.
Yep.
So, with a little prodding from Harley...
that just changed in the last few years. In fact, let's look that up real quick. So there have been a number of reforms over time to the House of Lords, but the most recent one, the House of Lords Act of 1999, after its election victory in 1997, the Labour Party began its plan to make the Lords more democratic and representative, the first stage of which was the removal of the hereditary element. So House of Lords, if you are a member of the House of Lords and you have a title, say you're a duke or a baron or something, and you pass that title on to your heir, that person then takes your seat in the House of Lords. So the Act in 1999 allowed 92 hereditary peers to remain members of the House of Lords for an interim period. They're still working on that. It reduced the membership in the House of Lords from 1,330 to 669 mainly life peers. Now, the House of Lords is also made up of, there's 25 bishops and archbishops. They're called the Lords Spiritual and then Lords Temporal, refer to the other ones. I don't fully 100% know all the details of it, but that's kind of the quick rundown.
Queen created 12 new peers, and presto, a majority of the House of Lords now wanted peace. But oh, the irony. By locking themselves into peace, they locked themselves out of the peace they wanted. Britain's push for peace meant that they made peace independently and earlier than their war allies, which left them with little to bargain with when it came time to actually work out the terms of the peace. In the end, the Spanish gave the South Sea Company the questionably lucrative right to trade slaves in the South Seas and the right to send one ship a year to each of the Spanish ports.
So you can see what's happening here. All of this is being motivated by greed and money, and greed for money. And so then now look how it's infecting everything. It's infected the war with Spain. It's infecting how the peace is negotiated and how much the government gets out of that peace. It's now affecting the slave trade. It's going to infect all of these things.
One ship a year. The Honorable East India Company was sending fleets of ships every month to maintain the kind of profits that Blunt and Harley had advertised. So while the public would continue to be told about the riches of the South Seas, it was now clear to everybody close to the venture that the South Sea Company was really just a financial institution whose sole business was managing the government debt. Then, in 1714, Queen Anne, the monarch of England, died without an heir. After much debate, George I, the Elector of Hanover, was chosen by Parliament to succeed Anne, and with the new king came a new government.
the king, who doesn't speak a word of English, he's German, but here's what happened. The reason they had to go to this, this is the end of the Stuart dynasty, by the way. So they passed, I think it was called the Act of Settlement, which basically said you can't be Catholic and sit on the throne of England and Scotland. Because as the monarch, you are also the head of the Church of England. And you can't be head of the Church of England if you're not a part of the Church of England, if you're Catholic. And so this act bypassed anyone who was either Catholic themselves or married to a Catholic. And so they had to go all the way over to a woman named Sophia, who was the Electress of Hanover. But she died just a couple months before Queen Anne did. And so then the title passed to her son, Georg of Hanover. George, who doesn't speak English, who's fully German, just like a lot of the British royal family is, German. And so he comes now, and this is kind of why you end up getting Robert Walpole as a prime minister, in part because you've got an English king who doesn't speak English.
Harley fell out of favor, and the Whigs regained dominance. So what did our good Mr. Blunt do in response? He did what any upstanding citizen would do, and promptly booted his erstwhile ally Harley to the curb, replaced most of the Tory board members in the South Sea Company with Whigs, and, in a stroke of genius, got the king's son, George II, to replace Harley as the largely ceremonial governor of the company.
Now, granted, he's not George II yet. That's what he'll be later on. And George I and George II, not big fans of each other. This is a very contentious... Not a lot of love lost between father and son.
He even got the king, who was desperate for funds for the royal household, to invest in the company himself. To further smooth things over in the transition, and to avoid some of the wrath of the now resurgent Walpole and Churchill, the very men the South Sea Company got locked up a few years before, the South Sea Company agreed to forgive the 2 years of interest the previous government had owed it, which helped the new administration to keep things afloat.
So again, money's motivating everything. Oh, we'll forgive some of the debt. Everything is being motivated by greed and wealth.
In return, the government allowed the company to issue more stock of an equivalent value to offset the loss, which meant the company had roughly £10 million of stock issued. To put that in perspective, that's about half the total value of stock issued by all companies in England. This for a trading company that's only ever managed to lose money on trading.
So you're issuing all of this stock for a company that isn't generating any wealth. The only income they've really got is a tiny, tiny bit of trade income and some income on interest on the loans for the government. Certainly not enough to be paying out dividends to £10 million worth of stocks.
This wild success led members of the government to decide that it was time to offload more of the government's debt onto the South Sea Company. Because why wouldn't you, right? After all, if one company accounted for more than half of, say, the New York Stock Exchange with no discernible source of income, clearly the correct play would be to make it bigger. Instead,
so this is where you're getting the idea of a bubble. A bubble being something that grows and grows and grows, but at some point it's going to burst and come crashing down and everything with it.
Instead of, investigating its activities. So the new plan was to allow the South Sea Company to issue even more stock, and in exchange, the company... wait for it, would handle the government's debt from running the 1710 lottery. The lottery Blunt himself had created. Genius. That is a Montgomery Burnsian kind of genius.
This is so dirty. It's so just, you can, obviously in hindsight, it's easy for us to see. Most people didn't have all the details of this that we have. We can see what a mess and what a disaster in the making this is. Most of them didn't see that. A couple of people probably are fully aware of what's going on here.
But make no mistake, the government's strange confidence in the South Sea Company wasn't just due to starry-eyed politicians' desire for somebody else to deal with their mess. There was something else to it. In 1717, the king and his son, George II, had gotten into a fight. In an act of spite, the king had removed his son as governor of the South Sea Company and replaced him with himself. John Blunt now had the king himself as the company's royal figurehead. Whoa, right? Not only did this mean that they received a level of trust and prestige that they had never even come close to earning, but it also meant that the company was now in some ways too big to fail.
And there's a that's a phrase that we heard a lot. How was that? I want to say around 2008, 2009, that time period where you had all of these banks that were in the process of being about to go under. A lot of that because of the housing bubble, the housing market crisis, and the government coming in with these huge bailouts. I think they did some for the auto companies too. And that was the phrase they used, too big to fail. We can't let this company fail because of the ripple effect it would have on the rest of the world economy. And so they would throw money at it to prop it up.
If the South Sea Company collapsed, so might faith in the monarch, and they couldn't let that happen. But in 1719, as the lottery debt was being exchanged, another strange occurrence happened. There was a brief abortive attempt to overthrow the king by the Jacobites, the branch of the English monarchy that had itself been overthrown during the Civil War 70 years before.
So Jacobites, we've talked about this before, but if you're new to the channel, Jacob just being a Latin word for James. And this goes back to the Stuart monarchy, right? So when they bypassed all the Catholics in favor of Protestants, you have what's called the Glorious Revolution, 1689. William and Mary come to the throne and overthrow a Catholic without a fight. And then ever since that time, for the last however many years, you have had Catholics trying to put their monarch back on the throne. The Jacobites, they're called. And that's where you end up with these multiple civil wars. There's a lot of support for the Catholics. There's much more support in Scotland than there is in England, which is why a lot of this rebellion really becomes kind of a Scotland-England thing. But there's even factions within Scotland. So, yeah.
It wasn't successful, but when that whole affair was put to rest, the South Sea Company did everything they could to fuel the sense of jubilation spreading around England, going so far as to peddle fabrications like the fact that the pretender to the throne had been captured, ending the Jacobite threat forever. In doing so, they managed to crank up the stock of the South Sea Company from £100 a share to £114 a share. Doesn't this make you just want to hit one of these people?
And again, they're in the know, but the average person doesn't have any clue this is going on. Just like the average person doesn't always see what's going on behind the scenes in the government or, and today we have instant communication through the media, 24-hour news channels. There's a lot more ways to get our information and get it quickly. They didn't necessarily always have that back then.
And that stock value increase is important because when the company had agreed with the government on how much stock they were going to issue, they agreed to an amount that would let them cover all the debt they were picking up at £100 a share. But now, as the stock price rose, they found themselves paying for that same debt at £114 a share. And at that rate, they didn't even need all those shares to cover the debt anymore. What did they do with all those extra shares that they'd issued but that they no longer needed to cover the debt they were obligated to pick up? Why, they sold them and pocketed the profit. Because, of course they did. This gave...
Again, now they're making profit on a company that's not making any money. Oh, it's like a...
blunt ideas. Very, very big ideas. Join us next time for the meteoric rise of the South Sea Company.
So this is all on paper that this is happening. There's no real wealth here. It's completely manufactured and invented.
The ennobling of John Blunt, and a company valuation higher than all the currency currently in circulation in England.
What an absolute mess this is shaping out to be. And there are going to be people who are victims of this and who get left out in the cold when it all comes crashing down. But that is a story for tomorrow. In the meantime, let me know your thoughts. If you have something to add to the conversation or maybe something you learned that you found interesting today, use the comment section below. Please, again, consider subscribing if you haven't already. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.